Are you suffering with sciatica and you're wondering what the cause might be? If you are, then hopefully this video will give you all of the answers you need. Hi everybody, my name is Will Harlow and I'm the Over-Fifties Specialist Physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And today I'm going to be revealing the 3 most common causes of sciatica, who they affect, what happens to cause them, and what you can do to improve them. Now, before we dive into the content of the video, if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel using the link in the bottom right, because then you'll be the first to hear about our new sciatica videos when they come out. Now that that's been said, let's talk about sciatica and the 3 most common causes. Now, sciatica is just a word to describe not a condition, but a collection of symptoms. And the symptoms we're talking about with sciatica are typically anything to do with nerve pain in the leg. Now, classic sciatica involves pain that runs down the back of the leg, but sciatica can also refer to pain that goes down the side of the leg or down the front of the leg. It's always nerve related, otherwise it's not true sciatica. And you might also get pins and needles and numbness or weakness in the legs along with it. So that is what sciatica is. But to cause the symptoms of sciatica, there has to be a trigger. There has to be something that causes it. Now, there can be lots of different causes of sciatica, but there are 3 that account for at least 95% of the cases of sciatica we see in the clinic. We aren't going to talk about the more esoteric causes. We're going to talk about these 3 most common causes today, because chances are, if you're suffering with sciatica, it's for one of these 3 reasons. So let's talk about the reasons now. I'll explain them one by one. We'll talk about who gets them and how they occur and what can be done about them. So the first common cause of sciatica, and by far the most common reason people get it, is due to what we call a disc injury. So either a disc bulge or a disc herniation. Now I'm going to use my model here to describe what that is. So this here is the human spine. You can see here we've got the pelvis, and then these white bones here are the vertebrae. In between the vertebrae, we've got these jelly-like things, and these are called our discs. And the discs separate the vertebrae from each other. They allow the spine to be flexible, so they allow it to twist and bend. And they provide health to the bones themselves. They provide nutrition and they provide hydration to the bones, okay? Now, if we turn the spine around, you can see at the back here, we've got the spinal cord that runs through the middle of the spine, which you can see if I pull the vertebra apart, it's that yellow thing. And then coming off from every level at the spine, we have these yellow nerves, and these are the nerve roots, and you have one at every single level of the spine. Now, as we get older, the discs in the spine can start to develop tiny little weaknesses that affect the outer layers of the disc. And inside the disc, we have a fluid center. And if the weakness that's in the outer layers becomes too bad, the fluid center can start to push back towards the outside of the disc. And we call this a disc bulge. I'm going to show you on this model here. So a disc bulge looks something like this. And this is when we have a weakness in the outer layer of the disc and the inner material starts to push back. Now, if that gets worse, that can become something called a disc herniation, which is where the bulge doesn't stop there, it actually leaves the disc and it can start to pinch that nerve. A bulge can do that as well, but a herniation can also pinch that nerve. And both of these things can cause sciatica. So who is likely to get disc bulges? Well, the research shows that the most common group of people to get this problem are men, and men who are between the ages of about 40 and 60. Now, the reason this tends to affect men more than women is not fully known, but it could be because men tend to have more physical jobs. That's how it's been through history. And disc problems are especially common in the very manual professions like builders or people who spend a lot of time lifting and shifting. Now, it could also be due to changes in, the skeletal structure between men and women, but we aren't quite sure about that. Chances are it's probably due to lifestyle. So it's more common in men. And it's also common in the ages of 40 to 60. Now, if you're younger than 40, for most people, the discs are still pretty strong. They're still filled with water and fluid, so they're pretty tough. Then as we get to about the age of 40 and going on through to our 60s, we can develop little weaknesses in the outer layers of the disc, which makes a bulge or a herniation more likely. And you might be asking, well, why does it stop at 60? Why doesn't it get more and more likely as we get to 70 and 80? And the reason is because as we get past the age of 60, for most people, the discs start to really dry out. So they not only lose their height, but they also lose their turgidness. So they don't have as much potential to bulge anymore. So it's actually one of the very few benefits to aging is you have a less likely chance of disc bulges or disc herniations. Okay, so it's most common in men between 40 and 60. Obviously, it does happen in women as well. The split is probably 60-40, men to women, if I had to put a figure on it. But for both pockets of people, it can be really, really painful and very debilitating. Now, the symptoms of a disc bulge include very severe pain, either in the back or running down the leg. It's very common that it causes pins and needles or numbness. It can cause pain when sitting. Some people find pains worse when they're up and about and moving, but more commonly it's worse when you're sitting or bending. That's also a big trigger. It tends to be better for people when they lie flat on their back. That can often help the symptoms to improve. And a disc problem is probably the most likely out of these three causes to cause one of the more severe conditions called cauda equina syndrome. Now, cauda equina syndrome is quite a severe problem. It's a medical emergency, which is usually categorized by problems with the bladder and bowel, numbness in the private parts, pain down both legs, and very severe weakness in the legs. And cauda equina syndrome happens when not the nerve roots at the side of the spine, but the actual spinal cord itself near the bottom, we call this the cauda equina, when that gets pinched by a disc bulge, that can cause a whole host of symptoms. So if you're suffering with those more severe symptoms I just listed, the best thing to do is go straight to your accident and emergency department because it is a very time-sensitive condition and needs dealing with right away. So if you've had a disc problem, one of the common things to ask is, well, why have I had this? And one of the biggest reasons for having it is bad technique when you're lifting and moving things around. So people who bend and twist with heavy objects are very likely to get this type of injury if they don't do so with care. Okay, this is why it's important to have proper lifting technique. Now, the other thing that can cause a disc problem is just bad luck. So some people get worse deterioration in the discs than others. Some people are just more prone to getting this injury too. A lot of the time it's not anything you're doing wrong, but it can usually be improved if you start doing the right things. So to get this better, we always recommend seeing a professional because it's quite a difficult problem to treat on your own. Things like improving the mobility of your spine can help. Doing exercises that improve the mobility of the nerve can really help as well. Building up strength, doing as much walking as you feel comfortable doing is another thing. Drinking plenty of water to restore the hydration in the discs, that really helps too. And getting plenty of rest without spending too much time just lying down are all good pieces of advice for most people. But because this is a complex injury, it makes sense to go and get some individual advice. So that's the first problem and the most common cause of sciatica. Now, the second most common cause of sciatica is arthritis. Now, when I say arthritis, what I'm talking about is anything in the spine that involves age-related deterioration. So as we get older, just like any of the joints in the body can, some people get wear and tear to their spines. In fact, most of us get wear and tear. Now, as we get older, what we end up happening is the discs in the spine start to dry out, so they lose their height. We get the facet joints at the back here tend to get really thickened and they lose their cartilage. The bone itself in the vertebra starts to get thicker as the body tries to spread the load. And then these changes can combine to start to shut down the spaces where the nerves leave the vertebra. Now, when this happens, if you're unlucky, what can happen is that closing down of the spaces starts to pinch on the nerves, and that can cause sciatica. Now, who does this problem mostly affect? Well, The most common people for this to affect are people over the age of 60. Okay, typically arthritis in the spine starts to become more of a problem for people 70 plus, but I've had people in their 60s with this problem as well. It happens equally in men and women. We're not convinced that it's to do with the way you live your life. It could be more to do with genetics. So we're not sure whether or not lifestyle has an influence. One of the things that is clear to us is people who abuse their spines earlier in life tend to have more likelihood of this problem later, but most of the time it's not because people are doing anything wrong. The key signs of this problem tend to be an inability to stand up straight or lean back. That can often set the pain off as well. Usually people with this problem tend to find that sitting improves their symptoms, whereas walking around and standing upright makes the symptoms worse. So that's how it often differs to the disc problem. People with this issue often find that they're very stiff when they try and twist and bend as well, so they don't have much range of motion. And they might find that the pain is slightly less severe but more nagging in nature. There's a type of spinal arthritis where the symptoms get worse and worse, and this is called spinal stenosis. And this tends to be characterized by pain in the calves and the backs of the legs when you walk for any period of time. So people who get more advanced spinal arthritis can sometimes develop spinal stenosis. Now, what do people with spinal arthritis need to do to help it to reduce sciatica? Well, there are a few things you can do. You can improve the mobility of your spine, first and foremost, because that tends to help the nerves in the spine glide more freely and reduce the symptoms. That's a big one. The second one is to stay active. So staying active helps, again, to improve the flexibility of the spine and your general health. Another thing you can do is you can try and lose some weight. Any extra pressure on the spine is going to be making that compression on the nerve worse. And again, that can make symptoms worse as well. But again, if you have spinal arthritis, don't just write yourself off as, oh, this is how it has to be now. For most people with treatment, the symptoms can improve at least to a degree. Now, the third most common cause of sciatica that we see is something called piriformis syndrome. Now, the piriformis is a small muscle that lives deep in the buttock on both sides of the hip. So if we're looking at the spinal model again, this is your spine, but the piriformis is all the way down here. Okay, so the piriformis is a very small muscle which is deep. You can't see it, it's not near the skin, it's underneath the gluteal muscles. Now, for most people, the piriformis exists and gets on with its job quite happily in the hip. For most people, the sciatic nerve runs underneath the piriformis, well out of its way. But for around 10% of the population, the sciatic nerve actually runs through the piriformis. It almost dissects it and goes through it like this. So for this 10% of people, if their piriformis gets tight, it can pinch the sciatic nerve and cause pain down the leg. Now, who can this happen to? Well, piriformis syndrome can happen to just about anyone, but it's very common in people who sit for a long time, probably because of the direct compression of the piriformis on the chair, which pinches the sciatic nerve. It's also common in athletes. So it's common in cyclists and runners, probably cyclists because of the saddle, but runners because they're activating the piriformis over and over to run, and that can make it tight as well. Now, the signs and symptoms of piriformis include worse pain when you sit down. The pain tends to be located mostly in the buttock and then spreads down the leg. Most people with piriformis don't have any back pain, whereas they do have back pain with the other causes instead. And there's often a lot of tenderness to press on in the buttock. So if your buttock is really tender, that can be a sign of piriformis syndrome as well. Now, people with piriformis syndrome can usually solve the problem by fixing the mechanical issues inside their hip. And when we say mechanical issues, what we're talking about is the way the piriformis muscle works. So if the piriformis muscle is overworked and it's becoming tight, if you can get it to work less and to loosen it up a bit, it should free up on the sciatic nerve and stop compressing it as badly. So for most people with piriformis syndrome, they have quite weak gluteal muscles. So the other muscles in the hip are not doing their job. So the piriformis is having to pick up the slack and it's getting tight as a result. This is particularly the case for runners. So if you're a runner and you find that you've got piriformis syndrome, chances are you've probably got weak glutes and the piriformis is overworking. So the goal for you would be usually to try and strengthen your glutes. Now, some people who aren't runners and don't have weak glutes, they can also develop piriformis syndrome. And these people most likely get the problem because they're spending too much time sat on that area and it's irritating the sciatic nerve. So make sure you're not sitting for as long, or if you can't help it, get a ring cushion with a hole in it to stop the compression of the seat on your piriformis. So those are the three most common causes of sciatica. We've got disc injuries as number 1, arthritis as number 2, and piriformis syndrome as number 3. So I hope that video has made sense and it's been helpful. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave me a comment below. And if you want more from me, please feel free to pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50 and you can find it on Amazon using the link below this video. That's all from me. Thank you very much for watching and I look forward to speaking to you on the next one.